Welcome to One Spark at a Time with me, Rabbi Adam Miller. A Jewish mystical legend tells that during creation, something broke and shattered, scattering sparks of divine holiness all around the world. It's our responsibility to do acts of tikkun olam, to repair the world around us. Each time we do a good deed, we are gathering one more of those holy sparks, making our world a little more whole and holy. Today, I'm delighted to have with us an individual who is doing this sacred work, one spark at a time. Rabbi Dr. Shmuly Yanklowitz is the president and dean of Valley Beit Midrash, a Jewish pluralistic adult learning and leadership center. He's the founder and president of Uri Letzedek, Jewish social justice group, the founder and CEO of Shemayim, a Jewish animal advocacy group, the founder and president of Yatom, a Jewish foster and adoption network. He's the author of 18 books on Jewish ethics, and Newsweek has named Rav Shmuly one of the top 50 rabbis in America, and The Forward has named him one of the 50 most influential Jews. Shmuley, welcome to One Spark at a Time. It is truly an honor to have you with me today.
Great to be with you. What an honor. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and there's so much to talk about, only a limited time. For those in our audience who may only be meeting you for the first time, you are truly a remarkable and inspiring colleague. I studied with you for the first time at the CCR convention in Atlanta, where you were among our guest teachers. It was such a memorable experience as we talked Jewish ethics. And so that our audience can get to know you as well, one question I invariably receive when I meet someone new is, so, new, how did you become a rabbi? I know it's a cliche, but help our audience by sharing what brought you down this path.
Well, thank you so much for the question. It's interesting. I was in a documentary called The Calling. And at the time I felt the calling, which followed Christian clergy students, Muslim clergy students, and 2 Jewish clergy students. I felt like the calling was such a Christian language, and I really shifted on that, because I think there's a humility to saying I didn't figure out my path; I was kind of called towards it, and I think that it does help to do this type of work to feel like one is called. People often ask me theologically about the issue of chosenness. Mm-hmm. And yes, chosenness, Jewish chosenness as a form of Jewish supremacy in a hierarchical fashion is problematic to me. But chosenness in a sense that everyone wake up in the morning and feel chosen to be alive, feel called to a mission, speaks to me very deeply. And so I think that sometimes we limit the sense of who is called to a small group of people. And I think all of us can feel this challenge of, what am I called to do in my life? You know, what's the unique greatness that I'm here for? As Rabbi Nachman famously said, the day you were born is the day that God decided the world could not exist without you. And so I feel that. Now, in regards to the rabbinate itself, I was on very different paths. Nobody would have guessed if they knew me in my first, let's say, 16 years, that I would have taken that path. But there's a number of things I can point to, and I'll point to one idea and one experience. Not that they were the formative ones, but they were very formative ones. One moment was at my Catholic grandmother's deathbed. Actually, I don't know if it was her deathbed or just a hospital bed on a path towards death ultimately. And I sat next to her as a young little grandchild does, without anything to say, just answering questions. How are you? Good. How are you spending your day? Nothing, And then I walked out of her hospital room, and I walked halfway down the hall, and I started to cry. And I said, is that really the experience I want to have with her? If that's maybe my last experience with her? Is that really all I have to offer her just because she's older and I'm a kid? And I went back into a room out of my comfort zone, and I said, can I say a prayer with you? And I was probably shaking. I remember shaking and holding her hand. And I was like, this is what I want to spend my life doing. I want to sit with people in prayerful moments that are major transitional, pivotal moments in life, and deepen those experiences and hold those. So that's one experience. And then one thought is, I have always been very death conscious. Very death conscious. I know that sounds kind of dark, but I mean it in a positive way. Life affirming, just very aware of the shortness of life. And if the pandemic did anything, in addition to sparking humility of uncertainty that we know nothing about what's coming next in this world, then it does inspire some humility around our life and our life expectancy and what will come in 5 minutes from now. And I felt that because of that consciousness, I wanted to live lishma, where I do things for their own sake. Now, I have a lot of respect for people who do things not for their own sake, but because there's an ends they're trying to achieve. The work itself is not meaningful, but there's an ends they're working to. The work is not meaningful, but they're raising money and they use that money to support a family, engage in philanthropy. But I felt that I wanted to spend my daily time doing things that for its own sake mattered. And I couldn't think of anything other than the rabbinate. I mean, there's many other fields where everything matters, of course. But for me, where I could be in the realm of ideas, the realm of raising sparks, as you said, the realm of trying to be a part of a healing process, a bridge building process, the realm of justice work, and feel like, I want to just try to walk my best self in the world, and I'll never get there, but I want to be in a type of job where that's what I can focus on.
Beautiful. That story about your grandmother is so touching, and it clearly was a transformative moment for you along the way. And I especially love that transformation you made also for the concept of chosenness, making it about where each of us finds our path. For you, part of that chosenness seems to be embracing the pursuit of justice. Tzedek tirdo. If you take that literally in so many ways, how did that become so personal for you?
Thank you for asking about how it became personal, because that's a unique way to ask the question. I can tell you about things that happened in the world and in my encounters, but because you asked on a personal level, let me speak to that. I really do think that we need vulnerability to understand this stuff. We need to be shook up. It's not intellectual understanding. And for me, a lot of it was vulnerability. I recall when my parents got divorced and we hit major financial problems, that I felt a vulnerability I had never felt in my life before. And that vulnerability opened up a whole new channel of understanding other people. There are great people I know who have the capacity for empathy without having had any major life struggles. And that's remarkable. But I think most people who have a great capacity for empathy, and not including myself because I'm striving to get there, but working towards empathy, they have had some experience where they decided their trauma and their pain was not going to make them self-absorbed, but make them other conscious. And so that experience really opened up for me this sense of human vulnerability and an ability to see it in others. So that's the personal dimension. The dimension of seeing it more broadly was my work in the global South. I had been doing work in Southside Chicago, handout type work, homeless shelter type work, where I saw things. I was aware, but it didn't click. I didn't understand issues of power and privilege and the like. But in going to the global South, particularly with American Jewish World Service, on a number of experiences as a participant and as a teacher, I experienced, I don't know if people still call it the bottom billion, but in the developing world, the deepest poverty on the planet, and people who literally have close to nothing on a financial level. And that with just one turn of weather can lose that very little bit that they were working on. And that issue more than issues of, at that time, race or refugees or environmentalism, other systemic issues, the issue of have and have-nots, the issue of not accessing basic needs was what woke me up to this. I can't feed my child food. I can't get the medical treatment I need. I can't have a roof over my head when there's a storm. That basic sense of like basic human dignities around substances, materials that people need to live. And seeing that was like, wow, I can't live the same after seeing this.
Wow, those experiences clearly touched you very deeply. And I think you're too humble to say you don't yet have the empathy. We can hear it in your voice, the emotion that's there. I want to talk about some of the experiences you have had, especially those that helped shape you. Along your journey, your education credentials are quite simply awe-inspiring. You're ordained as a rabbi at Yeshiva Chovevei Torah, a second rabbinic ordination from Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, another rabbinic ordination from Rabbi Nathan Lopez Cardozo of Jerusalem. You have a master's degree at Harvard in leadership and psychology, a second master's in Jewish philosophy at Yeshiva U, and as if that was not enough, a doctorate from Columbia in epistemology and moral development. How did all of that education play a role in shaping who you are today and where you're going?
I say this not to denigrate any of those institutions or great people, but they did very little to train me for the work I do today.
Wow.
When I look at the work I do today, the institutions and leaders that I had were thinking on a whole different plane. Let me give an example of, I don't want to overstate this, and I don't want to speak for other denominations, but the Orthodox study model is basically like, if you just learn a lot of Talmud and a lot of halacha, a lot of Jewish law, you're going to be ready to serve out in the world. And that's wrong. And that's actually wrong. It is really important to do a lot of Torah learning and a lot of Talmud learning. And if you're going to be in the halachic world, halacha learning. But that actually does very little to prepare one for a life of service and a life of pastoral leadership and organizational building and the like. And so what I got actually was something subconscious. You know, Heschel famously said, when I was young, I was impressed with smart people. And as I got older, I became more impressed with kind people. And thinking about that, when I was young, I was attracted to people who I felt had the world figured out. They were so smart, they had degrees, they had platforms where people listened to them. And I'm still impressed with smart people. And I think we need really thoughtful people in the world. But I am very skeptical of smart people who don't have their hands in the work. Armchair philosophers, and I know, columnists who their job is to write. And we need those people. Like, these are smart people. I look to people who have their feet in the mud, their hands in the mud, who are really deep in the work, but are reflective and thinking about wisdom in the process. And so go back to your question, what really, really molded me in that experience more than anything else were acts of kindness from really smart people. Not necessarily just smart people, but people along the journey who I thought I was chasing ideas, and I was chasing ideas. I thought I was chasing intellectual growth, and I was. But really, it was the acts when someone would invite me to their home and talk to me after Shabbat dinner. It was the act of someone giving me some financial aid to spend time studying in Israel. It was the time where someone would see that I wasn't present in class and actually ask me how I was doing. Those little acts of kindness along the path, more than any degree or brilliant class or anything, was what really kind of molded me as to what matters.
So recognizing that you said that there's a separation between the text-based learning that you got in the yeshiva model and the work that you're doing, having your hands in the work, is there still something that you draw on from that text or from the halakhic environment that inspires the work you do, or that gives meaning to what it is that you're doing?
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, so much. And here's, I think, one of the big reasons that I was attracted to the halachic world. And I say this not to say that this can't be achieved outside of that world, of course, but it was something that drew me into that sphere. And this is not for everyone, but for me, what it was that everything matters. Everything is worthy of observation and integration, and is present to the past and the future. Almost in a comedic sense, almost like a Seinfeld episode of like the humor of the analysis of small things, you know? And, it's like one of the famous, like most quintessential Talmudic episodes in Seinfeld. I'm not a Seinfeld buff. I've only seen probably less than 10 episodes in my life. But I remember this one where George finds some food in the garbage outside, and they debate whether he can eat it or not. And he says, it's above the rim. It's above the rim, so you can eat it. I says, well, how do you define the rim? What's below the rim? What's up the rim? Why can you eat it? Because it's above the rim. And this whole pupil, this whole Talmudic process of like, which garbage you can still eat, how high above the rim it is. And I was very taken by this idea that like Judaism or God or just life importance in general cares about how I put my shoes on, cares about like what I eat, like how I speak. And doesn't just care in some broad brushstroke, but cares like on a detailed level. And like, I grew up with sticks and stones will break your bones. And then I learned Chafetz Chaim on Shmirat HaLashon, the ethics of speech, where he had hundreds of rules and principles of how we think about not shaming other people and how we use our speech to build up people rather than break them down. Now, I understand why people would feel like, oh, this is also backwards. It's ritual obsession. And I think that is the risk, is that one gets obsessed with the ritual world and with the study, and that it never actually cultivates a universalistic consciousness or cultivates the character to a broader picture. You miss the forest through the trees. And But I think, and its intentionality, the way I experienced it was a hyper consciousness to everything around us, to every person, to everything, to what we do. And so that part of the learning I continue to love. Like, it's Judaism's not meta moments. It's not just Yom Kippur, and but it's like every little moment. And so that's something that I still continue to carry with me.
That's beautiful. And let's use that then as a transition. It's a little bit of a harsh one, going from the humor of Seinfeld, but let's really talk about what's happening in the world. You're someone who has really immersed yourself, even before the recent times, in the area of racial justice. So from your perspective, what are we seeing now, and what would you like to see from the Jewish community?
That's a great question. Thank you. Well, like all of your amazing questions, that's like a 5-hour question, but I'm going to try to say something half meaningful in 3 minutes, which is that it's,
Sorry about that.
It's only great. We should only ask big questions in life. The More Nevuchim, the Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed, is all about like pushing us in that direction. And so I think a few things. Number one, we have to shatter the false narrative that white Jews and people of color in America are marching hand in hand. We show this Heschel MLK picture to tell ourselves the narrative that Jews were central in the civil rights movement in the 60s and that we're at the forefront today, but it's just not true. Yes, there are Jews who are, and there are organizations that are, but by and large, because of white flight and Jews moving from urban centers to suburban areas, and economic gaps, and the fact that American Jews more or less assimilated into white America. Conservative Jews, by which I mean mostly Orthodox Jews, assimilated into evangelical America, and liberal Jews into Protestant America. And so we first have to just be aware that actually we're not in the work. Like we can say we're in it, we can show up at a rally or something, but I think we have a lot more to do. And I think that one of the vehicles there are the Jews of color in our world who can serve as bridges and as leaders, but also a lot of listening, a lot of allyship involved in the work. And I do think that there's a lot of conversation today around police brutality and around mass incarceration and just criminal justice in general, and there should be. But I think we also can't lose sight of economic injustice, the fact that poverty is a racial issue in America, and poverty is connected to social mobility and who has power and opportunity. And but I also think that that like we need to remind ourselves that Tselem Elohim, that people are created in the image of God, like is not a white Jesus on the wall, you know? And that's not a critique of Christianity. It's just astonishing to me that like there can be institutions that have a depiction of God as being having a skin color. It's one of the great things about Islam and Judaism is that we don't try to draw God. You know, we think it's sacrilegious to try to offer an image of God. The closest thing we get is a human face. And so I think that that this racial justice work starts within our own communities of our inclusivity and our own listening, and then it transcends beyond our communal walls into society in terms of policies that we advocate for. A lot more to say about this, but maybe I'll pause there for the moment.
Well, let's take that pause then. And look, there is a lot to say. There's clearly a lot of work, and you've identified racial injustice, economic injustice, a lot of areas that we need to address. And the prophetic spirit of Judaism is one that calls for addressing those injustices. But at the same time, prophets know it's not going to be a popular effort. Right. Where have you met resistance in your efforts to repair the world?
Okay, great. Okay, so much to say there. Thank you. The first thing I want to say is that the resistance is from all of us, because going back to racism, I think we sometimes get in the narrative that I'm good, I'm woke, and then there's those people over there who are not good, right? And in our hyper-politicized times, this is of course a reality today as well, but essentially this idea that I get it, but I think actually all of us have different levels of bias in us. right, around gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, wealth. And I think that one of the resistances is that all of us has to do work still. I think sometimes people think that the other people have to do the work. Those haters out there have to do it, but not me. And so I think that's the first level, is that each of us has to be a little bit uncomfortable. The second layer, most obvious to my own personal situation, is the resistance in Orthodoxy. I mean, having founded and still leading the only Orthodox social justice organization, people think of that as an oxymoron, and we can come back to that issue if there's interest. But essentially, part of my work has been to try to clean up shop and to try to really expose rather than sweep things under the rug, in regards to injustices that emerge from that community, and to really challenge the way that community operates, and to do it in spaces that are very uncomfortable because there's not a lot of support to raise that consciousness. And so those are my first two answers. I think my third answer has to do with the bandwagoning that comes with any movement building, which is to say, I think the progressive world is just as bandwagoning as the conservative world. By bandwagoning, I don't mean to equate like an anti-refugee policy with a pro-refugee policy. Like that would be a false equivalency, right? But I think the idea that we don't have to read books, we don't have to think critically. Like the average American reads 0.6 books a year. We could just be like, okay, what do conservatives say? I'm a conservative. Okay, I agree. What do progressives say? I'm a progressive. Okay, I agree. Right? Actually, like I think what it means to be a Jew is to push back on social conformity, to play a role of agitation, of pushing back against norms. And wherever we find ourselves politically or religiously, our job is to push back on the reform movement if I'm a reform, to push on the Orthodox movement if I'm Orthodox, on progressive if I'm progressive, and to play a role of agitation within the spaces we are to do better and be better in that process. And so those are the three. I think one is a personal level, second is Orthodoxy, and the third is just bandwagoning in general, where we just go with the flow because of ideology rather than critical thought.
It's certainly a powerful thought. And as you said, there's lots of areas we could possibly go in, but I want to be respectful of your time, which I know is tight today. I do want to pick up on that piece you were just talking about, the idea that, as a rabbi, part of the role is comforting the afflicted, and part of it is afflicting the comfortable.
Yeah.
We live in such a fractured world today. How do you accomplish those tasks in a way that unites rather than divides?
Awesome. Thank you for that. Your questions say so much about your own depth and commitment, because these truly are rare questions. So thank you. I think the first thing I would say is that we should keep the paradox alive of division and unity. I don't know that unity is always the answer. And I think that the Talmudic process teaches us of the power of division, the power of machloket, of disagreement, and rather than just agreement, and the dialectical tensions that exist in the evolution of ideas and of the constant changing nature of the human experience. And so I think that division, it can be really powerful and good, and of course so can unity. And I think so part of the question becomes, what's healthy division and what's toxic division, what's healthy unity and what's toxic unity? And to be sure, I also think there's times we should break connections with people. We talk about about inclusivity a lot and big tent, and I love that. But we can also ask the question, what's not welcome here? What's not included in our space, right? Is homophobia going to be called out? If someone says racist things, are they still welcome in our institutions, right? If someone is abusive or to their workers, are they still going to be honored in our institutions? How do we think about, and I've been a part of organizations where there were real scoundrels who were kind of in the top leadership. There were people who were really abusive personalities who, because of their wealth, were given major platforms. And I think that this is something the Jewish community has to grapple with, is how that shapes the nature of the American Jewish community. And so unity is oftentimes used to kind of silence some of the agitation which is necessary, where we need some division, and sometimes we need to call things out as being beyond the pale. That said, I do think that that we should be really careful, because Achdut Yisrael, the unity of the Jewish people, is so important to reunify this country. Like, this is not in the coming election. This is not just about having a win that we want, whatever wins we want. This is about healing a country. This is about healing a very broken, fragmented country. And this is also in families. Families are really hurting. One of the things you learn as a rabbi is that there is virtually no family that isn't hurting in some way. Yeah. Sometimes it's because of things like death or sickness, but sometimes it's because of real alienation. I'm yet to meet a family that doesn't have some alienation within their family, and they feel isolated because it's not talked about. They're alone. And so families need healing. Our communities need healing. Our country and our world needs healing. We need to rebuild trust around the world as America, but also as individuals. Where do I hold division within myself in a healthy way to see fragmented self? And where do I hold a unity of self? This is also true, going back to your idea of sparks. To what degree is godliness divided and separated into the world? And to what degree is there a oneness and a unity that's harmonious in the broader cosmos?
So you talked about some of those divisions, some of the fractured nature of families, communities of our nation. Clearly, over the last few months, COVID-19 has also drastically changed our focus and added to that sense of isolation, alienation. With all that's going on, I'm going to press you to try to pick one, and it might be impossible to do, but as someone who pursues justice in so many different fields, too long of a list for me to even give here. Yeah. Where do you think, if we had to prioritize, where should we be putting our energies right now to start that healing process?
Okay, amazing. Thank you. So here's what I would say, that for each of us, the question is, where is my passion and where is my power? Where's my passion? Where's my power? If we don't get involved with a cause that we are deeply, deeply passionate about, it keeps us up at night. It's something that I understand deeply. I feel deeply connected to. We will burn out. We will become disinterested. We'll do it for a few months and then we'll fade away. Anyone who's ever had volunteers knows that volunteer retention rate is very low. And there's lots of reasons for that. But one is that I think sometimes people are pulled into things they're actually not passionate about. There's one of the many reasons. The second is power. I shouldn't get involved in something that's just meaningful or cute or interesting, but something where I actually have some power for change, me uniquely as me. And so sometimes that might be we have some objective power within systems, but in other cases it might just be that we're in a personal relationship. We hire domestic workers, right? We're in charge of budgets, right? We are in relationship with people who are hurting other people. And we can get involved in that. And so where is my opportunity with my own power, and where is my own passion for doing something good? And I think each of us can come to a different answer. And the last thing I'll say is the amazing thing about being in a community is that we can choose our own things, but be connected to other causes by holding each other in that process, by listening to each other, by supporting each other. Each of us doesn't have to do all the work, but we can be in relationship and community with each other as we're doing different facets.
That's a beautiful charge for all of us. So I'm going to ask you to be honest with me. Do we have time for a couple more questions?
Yes.
Or how are you doing?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I've gotten a couple questions coming in from our audience who want to go back a little bit to that conversation on racial justice. And you mentioned that we have to break the myth of the Heschel and Dr. King and us all being there. But there's tension that exists right now, real tension between some parts of the Jewish community and the African-American community, particularly around Black Lives Matter. Some groups have really taken a negative stance towards Black Lives Matter. What's your reaction when you hear those things?
Okay, so I'm going to say something unpopular, I think, that won't necessarily make anyone super happy. But I think we have to live in the tension zone here, because I can't get on board with either side. Let me paint, I don't want to call them extremes, but two sides. One side says, I'm not going to be involved in this anti-racism work. These are a bunch of anti-Semites. right? And so I don't want anything to do with this, and so we can't participate. The other side says, you know what? The anti-Semitism is really not a problem. It's really not a problem. It's not an issue. It's not existing. It's not there. And I think both of those approaches are a problem. And I think that, yes, most of my work is exposing and calling out white supremacy as one of the great evils in America. But it's also true that there are rising levels and very high levels of anti-Semitism among people of color in this country. And that is a different phenomenon to grapple with differently than white supremacy for lots of reasons. But it doesn't get a pass. It doesn't get a pass. Like, as Jews, we should care about Jewish security. I think we should care about that anti-Semitism and not give platforms to people who say hateful things and give a pass to it. It doesn't mean we should just, cancel people, so to speak, who say stupid stuff. I say stupid stuff all the time, hopefully less and less as the years go on. But, I continue to say things that five years later, I'm like, oh, I can't believe I said that. And one of the sad things about now we live in a digital age, it's recorded forever, and so we live and we grow. But here's what I do think, that the fact that there is buried into a hierarchical platform of Black Lives Matter many years ago, a really indefensible position towards Israel, so calling out genocide, which is just absurd. Regardless of what our critiques are of Israeli policy, of which I have many, the absurd claim of genocide is so outlandish that we should speak out against that. However, it is also clear that the Black Lives Matter movement, as seen in the streets throughout America, the last thing on the minds of young Black men who are marching for their survival is Middle East policy. The last thing they are thinking about is the role of Jews and the role of Israel in regards to that conflict. And so to center ourselves and say that what matters most here in my participation is the perception of Jews and the role of Israel, I think is a mistake. And it's a moral mistake and a strategic mistake. It's a moral mistake because allyship means the humility of not centering yourself. We stand for Black Lives Mattering, regardless of what their view is of us, right? You don't say, like, I'm only going to be anti-rape if, like, the person being raped is like my friend or is nice to me or likes me. No, if you're anti-rape, you're anti-rape, right? You don't, like, just stand out up against rape when you have a good relationship with the person. So when something's evil, you call out evil and you join that. So that's the moral part. The strategic part is that there are times you just yell at people from a distance, but there's other times the way that you reduce hatred is by having a relationship. If you want to reduce anti-Semitism among people of color, you don't just yell at them. You get in relationship with them. You build respect. And by them seeing that Jews are people who care about them, Jews are decent people, and not just some stereotypical perception, Jews are wealthy people who are controlling the world and are manipulating systems for their own benefit and using our own victimhood for our own power, then the potentials are endless. So I know that's a little bit of a long-winded answer, and that might not make either side super happy. But here's my short conclusion. My short conclusion is it's a problem. Anti-Semitism in Black Lives Matter is a problem, and we should still be in the work.
It's a false dichotomy, is what you're saying. To say you have to pick an either or. Right, there can be a space in between and find ourselves in that tension. And by being there, create the relationships that will help us move towards a better place. Your drive to do all of this work is so remarkable. What inspires you to keep going? And what is it that keeps you up at night that you're thinking about that's moving you?
Well, what keeps me up at night is, on a concrete level, the issue that keeps me up most at night are children who are abused and neglected. My family is a foster family. We have an organization called Yatom, where we incentivize families to foster vulnerable children who have abused or neglected. And I just can't live, and all the problems in the world, I just can't live with having young children myself, biological children, the reality of young children who have their hearts wide open and are abused and neglected. And it's just the most horrific thing in the world to me. And that issue horrifies my mind. And it's concrete for me because when I hold a foster child late at night who's just screaming in the dark because the dark terrifies them because of things that happened in the dark to them, and hearing their screams that is an issue that keeps me up at night. What also keeps me up at night is the future of American Jews. I don't mean future of American Jews in a demographic sense. Jews are going to have babies. Jews are going to marry Jews or going to get intermarried and have a Jewish identity. Jews are going to continue to survive. But I care about the soul of the American Jewish people, in that I see two different extremes that often play out. One extreme is a tribalistic Jew who is highly parochial and not universalistic at all. Those two are at odds. I can't care about humanity because that takes away from my tribalism. And that tribalism is a very scary dimension of fundamentalism of any group. The other extreme is a type that says particularism detracts from my universalism. I can't identify with Judaism. I can't engage in Jewish ritual. I can't engage in Jewish learning. That makes me less universalistic. I'm less human by being more Jewish, and leads to a mass assimilation of the questions are embarrassing. I'd be embarrassed to say I believe in God. I would be embarrassed to engage in Jewish learning that didn't immediately lead to the conclusion of tikkun olam, right? And so I think this middle ground of a Judaism that is soulful, that is learned, that is robust, and that is universalistic is the question of, does our survival matter? I'm less interested in the question these days of will we survive, and more in the question is, does our survival matter? Are we playing any role in the global narrative right now that moves towards progress, that moves the world towards a more empathic spiritual revolution of higher consciousness? And I'm not so sure, because I see Jews who do tikkun olam work without Judaism, and that's not a critique of any particular group or facet. It may be a critique of myself at times. And I see Jews who hide away in the shtetl, so to speak. And I think this idea of a wise Jewish role in society is something that I feel challenged to how we're going to do this well. And I see Jewish social justice groups that are not informed by Jewish wisdom oftentimes, or very, very low levels of Jewish wisdom. And I see large Jewish foundations and institutions that are basically assimilated into America. There's nothing Jewish on that side either. And I see this both in the conservative and liberal sense. So I'm sorry to be so critical there. Let me get to the inspired side, because that was a little bit overly critical. But I do think we should all feel challenged by this dimension. I certainly do. And the inspired side is that I continue to feel that the power of kindness, as I said earlier, can radically transform people. That more than inspiring ideas, more than inspiring ideologies, I believe that when we go out of our comfort zone on a daily basis to help people to see their unique potential, to give to people in their vulnerability, to reach out at times where we can become so narcissistic, in a pandemic where everything is staying home, everything can become about the self, my own survival, my own thriving, my own financial security, nothing against those things. We have to take care of ourselves. Our capacity to reach out and go beyond the self. And when I experience these things, they transform me. I recently received a donation, a few years ago actually, for $5. And I looked at the $5 donation, and I was like, $5? This is so weird. If you're a Jew and you have any money, you don't really want to give, but you want to check the box. You give 18, but 5. And then it said, in honor of my mother. I said, your mother? You must not have loved your mother very much. I want to honor my mother in support of Jewish education. And then I looked down a little further after judging this person in my heart, and it said address, homeless, homeless. And I stared at the screen and I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. That this person, the level of sacrifice they had made to make this $5 donation was far beyond anything I had ever done. Given up a meal, given up 2 meals to honor their mother. And I ask myself each day, next to my agenda, more important than a to-do list is it might be a to-be list, but next to my agenda on my to-do list, what am I going to do today? Next to the things I have to do, like laundry and dishes and show up at my job and like change diapers at home, like, have I built kindness into that? Have I held myself accountable to do that kindness? And I've been so inspired by people who live that way. You know, people like you who, Rabbi Miller, who view kindness as so central to your work of serving people. People like you who are on the front lines each day of thinking of people who are mourning, who are sick, people who are in a low state. And that is what inspires me, because the news tells us that there is darkness. The news tells us that we should be cynical because we live in an evil world. But the truth is, at every given moment, empirically, there are more people doing acts of kindness than acts of destruction. The news will tell me right now of the murderer, of the corrupt, lying politicians, of the people who are complicit in exploiting. And that is a real problem to fight. But what's not going to tell me is that at this very moment, there are millions of people holding the hands of people who are dying. At this moment, there are millions of teachers who are reviewing a lesson for the 10th time with a child having trouble understanding. At this moment, there are millions of people who are rubbing the shoulders of their spouse who is depressed. At this moment, there are millions of people who are serving and view the purpose of their life as serving others.
Rabbi Shmuly Yanklowitz, that was a beautiful way to engage us, to teach us, and to show us kindness by taking the time to inspire us with your words and your life. It is so powerful, and I know it's going to inspire a lot of others who are listening and watching this to go out and do their work. If you had one final message you wanted to say to those who see the brokenness but haven't yet taken the step, what would you say to them to get them to move?
I think that our capacity to feel loved can enable us to channel love so far. And I think a lot of us are hurting in our own unique ways in terms of our capacity to receive love. Sometimes objectively, because there's not a person. Our life partner has passed, or our life partner and I have struggles in giving each other love, or we have alienation from a parent or from a child, or we struggle in friendships or in community. But we need to find ways to receive the love we need from God, from family, from people we care about. Because I don't think without receiving love, we can really channel it. There may be some gurus out there who can just generate it from nothing, but we need candles to light our fire, and we need to be fed. And oftentimes we think of self-care as a massage, as laying on the beach, as meditation, and nothing against vacations, nothing against spirituality. But I think the self-care we need most is receiving love. And then not seeing that love as an end in us, but seeing that love as something that fills us so much that it overflows to others. And so, not in a narcissistic way, but I think that in a service way, we should figure out, how am I getting the love I need to sustain my service in the world? And I think that if we're getting it and talking with people about how we're getting what we need, the people we care about, or finding new people who can help to do this with us together in mutually reciprocal, loving, trusting ways, in a Buber fashion of I and thou, that it will flow over. The people doing the greatest evils in the world, I think, are people who did not receive the love they needed and have closed themselves off from any capacity to be touched at their core vulnerability. So I give us all that bracha, and I hope you'll give it back to me, that all of us receive the love that we all deserve, because we deserve it. and that we can channel it onward.
Beautiful. Rav Shmuly, thank you so much for being our guest, for expanding our time with you. I want to thank all those who are in our audience watching and listening to One Spark at a Time with me, Rabbi Adam Miller. If you miss any part of our experience today or want to watch other episodes, the videos are available to the Temple Shalom of Naples YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to One Spark at a Time podcast, available on your favorite podcast provider. Let us finish with this beautiful teaching from Gandhi. Be the change you want to see in the world. Know that every one of us has the power to fix our broken world by embracing the change we want to see, one spark at a time.